on the web, and can I welcome our speaker this evening. Item 1, apologies for absence. I have apologies for absence from Councillor Unsworth. We have no substitute for Councillor Unsworth, and the rest, everyone else is here. Thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest or non-pecuniary interest relating to items on the agenda, having regard to the Code of Conduct for members? Councillor Mrs Spray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'll declare an NPI in item 6, the Tree Preservation Order 01A 2021, Garden Cottage, Mill Lane, Pedmarsh. I have had some phone conversations and email correspondence with the applicant's son, who is acting for them, only in regards to earlier this year. He wanted to know what the progress of the application was, whether it would come to committee and so on. So it was practical advice only. So I will remain and vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Probably an over declaration on item 5C, application number 210147994. I used to be friends with Frank Ledkin's sons when I was a lot younger, but had no interest in the thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Spear.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Declare an MPI in 20-02244 REM, only from the point of being ward member, and I've been at parish councils where this is discussed, but I wasn't involved in conversations, and I'll stay in vote.
Thank you. Anyone else that I haven't seen? Thank you. That brings us on to item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. I have the minutes of the 17th of August. Is it your wish that I sign them as a true record?
Move as a correct record, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Could I find a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Johnson. All those in favour of me signing them as a true record? Thank you very much. Item 4, public question time. We have no general planning statements this evening. Those wishing to make a statement will make their statement prior to each application. That brings us on to item 5, planning applications. Members, we have no items under Part B this evening. They are all under Part A. So we go straight to those planning applications. And the first planning application is number 20-02244 REM, Tennis Club, Braintree Road, Gosfield. This item can be found on pages 6 to 32. We have no speakers on this item, so we'll go straight to the presentation, which is going to be made by Neil. Thank you, Neil.
Good evening, members. So the first application this evening is the Tennis Club, Braintree Road, Gosfield. So this is a reserved matters application. So there was an outline permission granted.
Excuse me, Madam Chairman, could Neil put his microphone on, please? Are you on?
Is it?
Is it on?
No.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
So an outline permission has been granted. The outline permission is for 5 dwellings, access and car park to the tennis club. The access was approved as part of the outline permission, so all we're considering with this application is the appearance, landscaping, layout and scale of the development. So this is the application site, so you can the front denotes the site that we're looking at. So just to point out, you've got the Braintree Road running across the site frontage, so going sort of north towards Gosfield, coming back this way towards High Garrett. The access is an existing access to the tennis club just off this corner here, just near number 7 Braintree Road, just to the side there. The actual tennis courts are at the back here in the blue line. There's a, within the blue lines, so there's an existing pavilion and court there. The idea is that this area at the front at the moment is used as a car parking area just here, and the idea is the car parking is moved up to the back here, just by the pavilion, And then the front of this site is the site that's got the outline permission for the housing. So just in terms of principle of development, that's already been established. So the permission was granted on appeal in May 2020. I've just put up here the main reasons for our refusal, although they didn't find favour, obviously, with the inspector. So it was an argument about the suitability of the location for development. This was obviously at a time when we didn't have a 5-year supply. We were concerned about the effect on character and character and appearance of the area, adequacy of living conditions for future occupants, particularly given the flood lighting to the tennis court at the back. And there was also a reason for refusal about highway safety. Obviously, highway safety sort of fell away as the appeal went through. The Highway Authority accepted that adequate visibility could be provided at the junction. The inspector disagreed fundamentally with us with regards to lighting, and because of the situation with local plan and planning balance, the inspector took the view that it was an acceptable site for the development. So here we are with the reserve matters now. So what we've got is 5 dwellings in total, obviously in line with the outline. We've got a pair of semis and a detached house. Just before I look at the scheme that we've got for approval, this is the illustrative layout, which was provided with the outline permission. I've put this in because within the committee papers tonight, we've included the inspector's decision, and that did talk about the illustrative layout. So I thought it might be just worth highlighting this, because the inspector did make some critical comments about this illustrative layout, and I thought it was just useful by way of context to see this is what the inspector was looking at, and in a minute we'll have a look at the scheme which officers are recommending for approval. So I think the inspector was concerned about the layout appearing quite contrived, quite tight and quite cramped, very sort of shallow front gardens, awkward parking, and not really reflecting what is quite a strong building line along Braintree Road. If you can see, certainly from number 7 upwards, sort of to the right-hand side, very strong building line there. So this is the scheme which has actually been recommended for approval now. So you can see access is still the same, but where before the houses were sort of staggered, we've got the plot number 1, which is the one on the right-hand side of the site. That one is set back slightly, just behind the access. So as you come into the site off the Braintree Road, you're going to have a shared sort of driveway, access road across the front here. So plot 1's parking is just at the back here, and then plots 2 to 5 along here will have parking to the side, but it has a much stronger building line reflecting really what's happening along most of the rest of Braintree Road. And it, with the 2 pairs of semis as well, that's very much something which is reflective of Braintree Road. As you can see there, we've got repeated semi-detached houses as we go along. And then just at the back of the houses, we've got a retained driveway which is outside the application site. That's a driveway to number 5, the dwelling which is to the left-hand side of the site. And then we've got the new car park, which is being provided just in front of the pavilion at the back for the tennis club. So this is a slightly more detailed look at the layout at the front of the site. So you can see the parking arrangement a bit more clearly. I would say it's fairly spacious. We've got stronger front gardens now, stronger landscaping. There is a visitor parking space, which sort of accords with parking standards. And I think generally, we're comfortable with this layout. We think this is more reflective of the character of the street, the fact that you've got semi-detached houses, and the spacing, the gardens, the setback from the road, the building line is picking up all of those cues from adjoining sites. In terms of the amenity areas at the rear, you can see or you might not be able to see on the screen, but in the report it was certainly reported, they're all over 100 square metres, so that's meeting the minimum standard from the Essex Design Guide, so we're complying with standards there. And then these are just some of the house types. So this is plot 1, this is the detached house. So you can just see there, normal arrangement. And then this is where sort of in terms of the style of the houses, you can see these are all these houses are going to be quite strong gable-fronted properties. So you can see the drawing on the top left-hand corner there is the front elevation. So you can see that strong gable there facing the road with an element of wood cladding on the front. So it's predominantly red brick with a slate effect roof, but with these timber sort of panels which give it a much more contemporary appearance. So this is plot 2 and 3. So this is a pair of semis. So you can see again 3-bed houses, and then this is where you can see the gable fronts again. So very much a strong feature. And then this is plot 4 and 5, the other semi. So again, quite a strong appearance, quite a strong architectural style. And then in terms of street scene, so this is number 7 Braintree Road. So this is where we've got the sort of ribbon of development to the side going up here. This is obviously the entrance into the golf club and the car park. This is plot 1, the detached house, and then the 2 pairs of semis moving down. And then we've got quite a strong sort of boundary here to number 5 Braintree Road, which is the detached dwelling further down the road. So these are the materials which are being suggested. So you can see red brick and the slate effect roof I mentioned, and there's the wood panelling. Now, members will have had an update from officers today just to clarify the parish council's position. So the parish council have submitted comments on a couple of occasions on the application because we've had revised plans. We wanted to be clear what was happening with their position with regards to the cladding. So they have confirmed that they do object to the cladding. And their preference would be to see render, but as we've said in the update, officers are quite comfortable with the cladding or the cladding element that's proposed. We think it's quite appropriate. We think it reads well as a group of 5 houses, and we're happy to recommend approval as it's being submitted. So just some photos by way of context. So a couple of photos of the frontage. So you can just see there the existing access, hedge across the front. And then the photo on the right-hand side there is a little bit further along. So you can see quite a strong hedge there. There is an element of hedge which will need to be removed close to the access to improve the visibility. And that's sort of shown on the plans that was agreed as part of or agreed by the inspector as part of the outline permission. So the developer is retaining the hedge further along where they can. There is an element of hedge which will come out. They will be planting a new hedge, a replacement hedge in behind it, outside of the visibility splay. And then just a couple of photos from inside the site. So looking from the entrance up towards the courts at the back, you can just see the fencing around the tennis courts at the back there. And then this is looking at the back of the site, back towards Braintree Road. So that's the back of the entrance sign there. So this is the sort of existing car park. You can see sort of pretty informal car parking arrangements for the tennis club at the moment. And then this is just looking across the site. So this is looking, so the photo on the left-hand side, this is looking across the car park, across this sort of rough grassland. This is the boundary with number 5 here. And then the photo on the right-hand side is the driveway which leads through to number 5. So it's outside of the application site. So the sort of the picket fence is almost showing where the boundary is for the development, and the gardens of the houses will be along here. And just looking along Braintree Road, sort of going towards the east, you can see those pairs of semi-detached houses just going away in that ribbon development. And then this is the boundary with number 7. So this is sort of the existing arrangement. Next to the access to the tennis club, sorry. So there are a couple of trees which will need to be removed, a couple of apple trees. There is replacement planting being shown. There is some tree protection, obviously, to protect the other trees around the boundary. No other trees are being lost, save the hedge at the front, as I said at the start. And then this is the landscaping scheme. So you can see here, this sort of shows the extent of hedge that's being lost. So probably a little bit over half the site frontage, the hedge has been removed. So you can see where this sort of existing hedge here is being retained outside of the visibility display. This area coming down towards the access is to be removed and then replanted outside of the visibility display. So there's a couple of extra conditions I think I'd want members to add if they were minded to approve. So one is just about sort of management and maintenance. If I just go back to the landscaping scheme, one of the neighbours in their rep letters has questioned how the front of the site is going to be maintained. I think they're a little bit concerned about who's going to be responsible for the hedge, and certainly making the point that the visibility display needs to be kept unobstructed. So because that doesn't sit comfortably with any of the individual property owners, I think we need some sort of management arrangement plan put in place. So I think we need a condition to cover that. And then there was a couple of points in the committee report where the officers just picked up on things and explained why we think things are appropriate and why we're comfortable with things, but we just weren't covering them by condition. So one of them on plot 1, there is a first floor window, which we've said in the report will be obscure glazed and non-opening, and that's noted on one of the drawings. I think we should just have a condition to cover that, to make sure that's clear. And also around boundary treatment, so there are either brick walls or close boarded fences around the gardens shown on the plan, so I think we're clear what we should be getting. But it's just having a condition to make sure those things are actually put in before the properties are occupied. So that's just a couple of extra conditions to tidy things up, hopefully. But in terms of a summary, just to remind members, we're just looking at the reserved matters, so appearance, scale, layout and landscaping, which officers think are all appropriate. As I've tried to explain, we think the building line is now being respected, and those issues that the inspector picks up on the illustrative layout have been addressed successfully. So we think this would be a good addition to this ribbon of development here. We do accept that the design is distinct and different to the dwellings alongside, but we do think it forms a cohesive grouping, and we do think the contemporary appearance is appropriate. So, like I say, we think we've covered the issues that the inspector flagged up. We think we've addressed the issues that the neighbours have raised. So subject to the conditions the additional conditions and those listed in the committee report, this application is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This site sits outside the defined development boundary of Gosfield, and as the inspector concedes, is within the countryside. It's therefore a speculative application, even if it's not for private gain. And he was given outline permission, as we've heard, at appeal by the inspector, because at that particular time the authority couldn't demonstrate a 5-year building land supply. So we were overruled as to the principle of development, but that's where we are. We can't influence that at all. As to reserve matters, I agree on the two sort of main points that Neil's made. The building line, I think, has been much improved by negotiation, and that's definitely now a better fit with the sort of the linear development, the buildings to the south, and I agree that, you know, as 4 of the 5 dwellings are semi-detached, that will fit better with the existing street scene. So I think it's in plain terms, the reserve matters are acceptable, and I think the additional suggested conditions are also sound. But as it's a speculative application, Chairman, I'll decline to move the application.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Councillor Swear.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Madam Chairman, I think the officer's summary of this is pretty good, and I do agree with him about the change in the building line. I think that's been beneficial potentially for the village. And I also agree about the wood panelling. I think that is contemporary, and I think it's actually a good idea to show that if these, as and when these do get built, if they do, that they actually are slightly different from what's existing. So basically, overall, I think this is a good overall fit, apart from what my colleague has just said earlier. And I would like to move officer's recommendation. But could I just ask if we could have an informative for the applicant about EV charging, because I think it's an opportunity that we should include this on our planning applications as we go forward, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Swear. Before I'll come back to you in a moment. I'll ask Neil to respond.
I've made a note of that. We can certainly add an informative to encourage the applicant to look at EV charging. Yeah, we can do that. Thank you.
So I'll come back to you to move it formally if you wish to.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I wish to formally move the application and recommendations.
Thank you. And that includes the additional conditions.
It does. Thank you.
Does it find a seconder? Councillor Mrs. Spray, did you wish to speak?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Only just briefly to say I sort of agree with Councillor Mann's comment. I don't think the inspector's report was exactly a ringing endorsement of this site, but he did feel that as long as certain issues were addressed, he allowed the appeal. Certain points he made around layout, which have been picked up and dealt with. So, we are pretty bound by the appeal decision, really. So I will second it. I absolutely agree with the additional conditions, particularly around the maintenance of hedgerows, so on at the front. It's important that is maintained, and also very happy to support Councillor Shuair's suggestion that there is an informative regarding the e-charging points. Other than that, yes, I don't think there's a great deal else for me to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray. Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Yes, thank you. I agree with Councillor Shuair about the design. I think to have a scheme which doesn't necessarily mirror what's there already, but provides a more contemporary feel, particularly with the gable roofs, I think actually it's a good idea, and I don't have any problem with that, or with the actual timber cladding, which I think will break up the brick. So I would definitely support that. My only concern really is the hedge at the front, and because it was actually noted by the inspector that it's a pleasing landscape feature and it mirrors the hedge on the other side. And I think this was one of the aspects of the initial application that we were troubled with, and we felt that the hedge in particular provided quite a strong break to the building line and prevented there being a sort of ribbon development. And I think this was weighing quite heavily in our minds. So what I'm not quite understanding, I note that the appeal decision, the planning conditions in the appeal do state that the vehicle access should be provided with visibility displays to the south, but equally the application proposes removing half of the hedge, and it seems to me that it's removing it and then replanting it. Presumably that hedge will have to be kept at about the height of this desk, 0.6 metres high, but maybe Neil could explain that. I mean, what I don't understand really is why that hedge has to be removed if it's going to just be replanted with another hedge.
Thank you. Councillor Swear, can you switch your microphone off, please? Thank you. Neil, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So the reason that the length of hedge has to be removed is that the hedge closest to the access point, when you take your visibility display, so when you come back 2.4 metres from the carriageway edge, and you draw the splay across, it cuts through the hedge that runs along the boundary. But obviously, not obviously, but as you move across the site, it's sort of you're moving to a point where you're. Let me try and explain it better on the plan. So if you can see on this plan, the blue dotted line is the visibility splay. So because you're measuring, I can't remember the splays, I think it's 120 metres and 94 metres in the directions, or something like that. So you can see what you're doing is you're measuring along, so that one that cuts across the hedge, you're measuring 97.5 metres down the road on the curb side. Where the hedge is, that cuts through the blue line closest to the access, but as the visibility splay comes down towards the curb and towards the road, it starts to come out of the hedge line. So it's not necessary to remove all of the hedge. So if, I can't remember quite whereabouts it was, so I think what we're saying is here, as you come back towards the access, where that blue dotted line is where the existing hedge is. So what the developer is doing is they're planting a new hedge outside of the visibility splay so that it won't need to be restricted to 600 mil. If they were planting it within the visibility splay, then it couldn't be above 600 mils in height. Because it's back of the visibility splay, provided it doesn't grow into the visibility splay, then it can go to a greater height because it's not obstructing the visibility. But I think that's the point the neighbour was making, that if it's a native species hedge and it's left unmanaged, it could grow out as well as up, and if it grows out, it's going to start obstructing the visibility splay. So that's why we want to make sure it's managed appropriately so it doesn't start obstructing the display in the future. I hope that's explained it. I'm sorry, it was a bit of a...
Yeah, no, that has been very helpful. So, in effect, the hedge is not going to be planted in exactly the same place as the existing hedge. Will it end up looking quite like the existing hedge, or are you going to have a completely different species? Just quite like that sort of rural feel that the hedge is. Funny enough, I do feel that quite significant, that hedge.
So it's a native species mix that's shown in the landscaping plan. So it would be a mix. So it wouldn't be just an ornamental hedge or just one species. So it should, in time, look more natural, more in keeping.
Thank you, Neil. Does anyone else wish to add anything new or further? No. Well, it has been moved and seconded that we grant this application with the additional conditions regarding the management plan, enclosure plan, and the first floor window on the east with obscure glazing and with an informative regarding charging points. It has been moved by Councillor Swear and seconded by Councillor Mrs. Spray. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you, members. Thank you very much indeed. We now come on to the next application, 5B, application number 21-00930, full Whitton Body Repair Centre, Waterside Business Park, Eastways, Rivenhall. This can be found on pages 33 to 48. Once again, we have no speakers on this application, so we go straight to the presentation, which once again will be made by Neil. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a commercial development, an extension to an existing commercial premises on the Eastways estate. So you can see it's the Whitton Body Repair Centre. So a couple of plans to allow you to see where we are. So we're right at the upper end of the estate. So this parcel up here. This is the application site here. So you can see a substantial commercial building already on the site, surrounded by a large area of hard standing, some smaller sort of subsidiary outbuildings around it. Access is off this corner of the site at the front here. Also we've got the main railway line at the back here, and just obviously on the other side of the Eastways, we've got the A12 coming past. So large commercial buildings here. This site, I think, was allocated in the 2005 local plan. It's obviously been built, and the business is coming back and is wanting to extend, which is what we're looking at here. So this is an existing site plan. So you can see the building sort of sits fairly squarely, or the main building sits fairly squarely in the middle of the site. Two-storey in height. only got first floor accommodation at one end, lots of car park and lots of hard standing around it, which we shall come back to later. This is the proposal, so it's proposing a large, a substantial two-storey extension to the side, obviously taking out a fair amount of the parking and some of those subsidiary sort of outbuildings to the side. So this is existing floor plans, so you can see it's a large sort of commercial workshop area with an office sort of element at one end at the front, so that's the existing. And then this is the proposed, so you can see the extension on the right hand side, there'll be an extension to the office floor space and equally an extension to the workshop facilities. So elevations at the moment, so it's a metal clad building, fairly sort of utilitarian, sort of more domestic scale sort of fenestration to the front elevation where you've got the existing offices and the entrance to the building, and then sort of various roller shutter doors around the side and the rear to allow access to the workshop areas. And then this is the extension, so you can see an extension to the side, sort of mirroring sort of the design or the sort of gently sloping roof. No attempt to mirror it as such in terms of symmetry. We haven't tried to mimic the windows or whatever. It seems to be a practical sort of addition to the building. To give you some better sort of appreciation of the scale and how they read together, some 3D models that have been provided by the applicant. The blue panels on the roof are solar PV panels, which the applicant is proposing to install on part of the roof of the extension. So some photos of the existing site. So this is a photo taken from the entrance. So this is the existing building with the reception and the office at the front there. And then this is looking down where the extension would go. So a couple of those sort of ancillary sort of storage buildings or outbuildings which are used at the moment, which would go. With the increasing workshop space, things can be done inside, whereas at the moment, sort of where some of the operations needed to go outside because of lack of space inside. So some of the car parking areas, this is sort of looking towards the northwestern part of the site. And then this is looking back down towards East Way, so that's the adjoining building. Again, you can just see where the large hard standing is. So not all of the space is being used, so that's something I'll come back to when I just talk about parking in a moment. But just when you're looking at the photos, you can see a lot of spaces and obviously a lot of vehicles, but it's not sort of packed to the gunnels and people sort of park in willy-nilly or obstructing roadways. So that's just the existing rear of the building. So in terms of just a quick summary, so we're within development limits here, unlike the previous application. So this is within the Witton Town development boundary. The site, as I said, was allocated in 2005 for employment uses, and certainly the uses here are consistent with the consented use. So we're looking at a mix of sort of business or office space, general industry, and repair of vehicles. And in terms of the local plan, we're consistent there. It's now proposed to be designated as an employment policy area. And again, the uses that we're proposing here in the extension are consistent with that policy. So we think it's acceptable in terms of design and appearance. No significant objections from anybody. The Highway Authority did acknowledge sort of some pressure on the highway network, particularly around the entrance and exit from the East Ways estate in the afternoon peak. However, they sort of had to take their assessment with reference to the NPPF, and that's obviously, as we all know, says that we can only be looking to, or should be looking to refuse an application on highway grounds if the impact on the highway as a result of development will be severe. And the Highway Authority's conclusion is the extension here would not be resulting in a severe impact on the highway network. So in terms of parking, something we've tried to explain in the report, but perhaps just a little bit more by way of explanation. So approximately 250 spaces marked out around the existing building, which is obviously a lot, way in excess of parking standards. Obviously, because it's a commercial building, our parking standards don't have a minimum, as I would with residential properties. We have a maximum standard. So when we've looked at the floor area for commercial and office, that works out to 105 spaces. The application is proposing the retention or the provision of 113 spaces. So we've actually got provision over and above the maximum allowed under standards. But we think that's reasonable. The applicant has advised that there's approximately 25 employees working on site at the moment. They estimate with the increased workshop area and office space, they see that increasing to 50 employees. So even if all 50 employees drove to work, if there's 113 spaces, we've still got way more parking spaces than we would need to accommodate those. But obviously, because of the nature of the business, there is the need to store cars around whilst they're waiting for workshop space or waiting for parts to come in and so on. So I think where we've got an increase in workshop area, so more cars can stand inside, where we've still got adequate provision for employees and a surplus of spaces which will allow them to have vehicles waiting outside if necessary, we think the retained parking spaces would be appropriate. We'd say that not all of the hard standing around the building is shown to be retained for parking, so they are showing areas where there would be HGVs would be able to unload and turn, so they're not, or we don't, as officers, we don't think they're developing excessively or looking to overdevelop the site. We think it's appropriate in terms of parking and in terms of the size of the extension. So officers are happy to recommend approval, obviously subject to conditions and to Section 106 agreement, which is being drafted. The 106 would cover two things. So there would be a workplace travel plan, which we would need to have. That would need to be monitored, or we would want that to be monitored by the county council. So there'd be a travel plan monitoring fee of just over £6,000 to cover that. And the other contribution would be for public open space. So we don't take a contribution towards things like allotments or quick to play, but we would expect to see proportionate provision towards amenity space and outdoor sports. So that's the figure that we worked out is just over £13,000, which will be used on projects within the Open Spaces Action Plan if the money, or if and when the money is paid, if permission is granted. So hopefully that covers the main points of the application. But obviously, if there's any questions, please ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you. It's very detailed. Thank you. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you. Before I speak, could I ask a couple of questions, please? Will the substantial buffer planting on the northeastern boundary survive the development, or is any part of it proposed to be retained? Is there any proposed landscaping planting as part of this development, separate to that question? And thirdly, could Neil explain exactly the access arrangements on that northeast side? Because taking up, I thought I saw in one of the elevations, you're taking up, the proposal is to take up a large amount of that car parking space, but there appear to be some roller shutter doors there. So I'm just wondering how if that's correct, how would the access work?
So, in terms of the parking, so if we just go back up, so if we're looking at the boundary across the top here, that hard standing is there already, so you can see those parking arrangements, so that's not changing in terms of, so there's nothing coming out or being lost along that boundary across the top. And then down the side here, we're looking at retention as well, and then on the point about the doors, I'll find that one. So on the northeast elevation, we've just got a couple of small sort of pedestrian service doors, so we haven't got any roller shutter doors on that side.
Okay, it might have been the existing elevation and I saw them, sorry about that. Yes, it was, thank you. Okay. Yes, this site is obviously within policy as an employment area. I share the concerns about the increased pressure on the junction between Eastways and Colchester Road. We're not likely to get a significant improvement to that until the A12 works are done, which I think will keep asking Highways England. We could be looking at another 5 years. So as these employment sites continue to come forward, that junction is going to come under increasing pressure, but I appreciate we can't do much about it under the current rules. Glad to hear the buffer planting will be retained, and that brings me on to my main point. Although this is an allocated industrial area, that side faces directly out onto the countryside, what's left of it. All of this land used to be part of rural Rivenhall. It's now within Whittam. Whittam continues to expand outwards into the parish. But that's not a reason not to protect residents and Rivenhall End from any impacts. So I'd be happy to propose we grant this, subject to definitely knowing or conditioning that landscape buffer survives. I don't know if we can do that, to say it has to survive this development. And secondly, a standard lighting condition, because the existing lighting on the northeast elevation is the old-fashioned bulkhead lights. We could do an improvement here, that they're actually to a much better standard, so they don't shine out beyond the boundary on that northeast side. So I'm happy to move on that basis. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Neil, would it be possible to condition those two things? Yes.
So I'm just having a look. So if I could draw your attention to condition 11. So that is saying that development can't be commenced until a construction method statement in respect of trees has been provided, and it's in accordance with the arboricultural assessment which was provided with the application. So I think what we're saying there is we've got an arboricultural assessment which gives us details of what's been retained and how that could be done, but we haven't got the detail of how that is, so exactly where sort of tree protection goes, that sort of thing. So we're comfortable it can be retained, it's just the detail we need. So I think we've got that covered with condition 11. I was just having a look to see if we had anything on lighting, which I'm guessing we probably don't because Councillor Abbott's asking for it. So if we haven't got that, then we could certainly add a condition to cover external lighting to pick up that point. Yeah.
I'll move on that basis. There was just the lighting condition.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Does it find a seconder?
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Horner. Did you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak on this item? Well, it has been moved and seconded. It's been moved by Councillor Abbott and seconded by Councillor Horner that we grant this application with a lighting condition added and more security, making sure about the boundary growth is not taken down. Are you happy with that, like that, Councillor Abbott? Yeah. All those in favour? Thank you, members. That also is unanimous. Thank you very much. I'm now going to give Neil a break. We go on to the next application, 5C, application 21014794, land west of Rosemary Lane, Halstead. Can be found on pages 49 to 71. Once again, we have no speakers on this application, and this application is going to be presented by Mel. Over to you, Mel. Thank you. Okay.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Good evening, members.
Good evening.
So the application before you this evening is at land west of Rosemary Lane in Halstead. It's the erection of two buildings comprising 7 commercial units, and B2 specifically, with associated access road, cars, bin stores and an electricity substation. So this slide here shows the location plan. Some of you may well know the site. It's fairly central within the town of Halstead.
So at the north here we have Housestead Football Club, and then this road here is Butler Road, and then to actually access the site by vehicle you drive down Broughton Drive, and then onto Rosemary Lane, and then the existing development around the site is all with other existing business uses. I'll get onto those in a second as I have some photographs. So you can see just to explain the rather odd shape of the site is this part here is an existing substation which does fall outside the red line of the application site, but that's why we've got that triangular piece of land left out. So this is the proposed layout. So we've got two buildings on the site. The one to the bottom of the site, Unit 7, will just contain one single unit, so it's the largest unit proposed, and it has its own dedicated car parking area to the right-hand side. Along the top of the site, we have one single building in a slightly curved arrangement, and that contains 6 smaller units, all with parking and cycle parking to the front. We've also got the existing access, which is down here. That will remain unchanged, and that provides access to the whole site, and tracking information has been provided to demonstrate that HGVs and large vehicles can access and turn and leave the site in forward gear. This plan here just gives you a bit more information in terms of the 3D layout of the site. You can then make out the car parking area and the access drive that runs between the two new buildings. The next slide show proposed elevations. So these are of units 1 to 6. So it is a 2-storey building. However, internally, the floor plans are open to the ceiling, so they're double height units. These elevations are to the rear, so this is the elevation that would front onto where the football club is, and the bottom elevation is the one that would front onto the access road that runs through the centre of the site. So you can see they've all got their own separate accesses and roller door access points as well. So this slide here shows the floor plans for units 1 to 6. So as I say, set up as 6 smaller units in comparison to Unit 7, which is a much larger unit. These show the floor plans and elevations in more detail for Units 1 to 3, and then these are the same for 4 to 6. And then these are the elevations proposed for the separate building, which is for Unit 7. Again, this is a 2-storey building, but with a vaulted ceiling, so it's a double height building. So fairly standard elevations for the proposed industrial buildings, and that's the proposed floor plan. That gives you an idea of the style of the building with that 3D representation provided by the applicant. And then this is the frontage of Unit 7. So this is what you would see as you first drive into the site, as this is the elevation opposite the proposed or the existing access. The next slide shows some street scene images. So the bottom picture here is taken from the public footpath, which runs along the bottom of the site. So again, you can just see Unit 7 in the foreground and then 1 to 6 behind. And then this image here is if you were standing on Butler Road, and there wasn't any vegetation at all, but there is. So when you see this elevation in its full, you can just see the ends and the back of Unit 7, and then Units 1 through to 6. This is the back of Units 1 to 6. So again, this would be the view from the football ground. Some detail of the proposed bin store. And then this is the proposed substation, fairly standard elevations. The next few slides show photographs of the site. It's a rather rainy day when we went there. And so this is the existing access where my car is parked. You can just make out an existing business operating to the south of the site. The next slide actually shows where there's a public right-of-way that runs along here and then accesses right through onto Butler Road, and it runs along the southern edge of the application site. This is looking away from the site down the end of Rosemary Lane, which is just here, and then this is Broughton Road. So these are existing businesses already located in the area. That's just turning a little bit further around other existing industrial buildings on this site, near the site. This photograph here is the existing industrial building that's located to the east of the application site. So behind where this hedge is, that's the application site, and then beyond that is our other existing businesses, and then the football club. The next photographs show views across the site. So it is a vacant plot at the moment. It is considered brownfield, although slightly overgrown. And as you can just make out, there's a floodlight there, this is the corner of the football ground, and then beyond these trees is Butler Road. This is a photograph looking towards the north and the football ground. You can just make out the floodlights and then other existing industrial buildings in the area. This is the existing industrial building that lies between the site, partially lies between the site and the football ground beyond. This existing tree is within the site, and you can just make out the compound for the existing electricity substation, which was on that triangular piece of land that I pointed out on the site location plan. These existing trees are proposed to be retained within that corner of the site. A better photograph of the substation that lies outside the application site, but in the corner. This is a longer shot, so I'm standing further away, so you can see more of the site. As you can see, it's overgrown. It's been cleared, but as we probably all know, it doesn't take long for things to become overgrown quite quickly, particularly with the weather we're having at the moment. So you can just make out other existing industrial buildings within the area, and then the football ground beyond. And again, it's another photograph showing more of the site. Just behind where I'm standing is the access point. You can make out the electricity substation, the football ground beyond, and existing buildings to the north. And these are buildings to the east of the site. So turning to the proposed heads of terms, which have been set out within the committee report, I just wanted to provide you with an update. These two heads of terms, which relate to public open space and local cycle infrastructure, those heads of terms have been agreed, and a draft legal agreement is currently being worded. Moving on to the summary, the site lies within the town boundary of Housestead, where the principle of development is considered acceptable. The proposal is for the redevelopment of an existing brownfield site in a sustainable location. Officers consider that the proposal have an acceptable design, and the development complies with policies RLP 33 and RLP 28 from the local plan, and the site is located on land allocated for an employment use. The proposed development will therefore constitute sustainable development in the planning balance, and it's therefore recommended that planning permission is granted. Happy to answer any questions. Oh, I didn't have that one. Oh, I did a Juliet.
Thank you, Mel. Councillor Mundy.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Melanie, for the presentation, and we could hear you, so it's okay. This is an undeveloped site at the moment, and it does sit within the current industrial area of Broughton Drive. The proposal is welcomed in Housestead for the additional employment that it's going to bring. The buildings that are going to be put on there are not untypical of the other buildings within that area. It is nice to see that the trees on site will be retained, and I'm sure Councillor Abbott will be happy about that. I also thank the officers for the S106 contribution arrangement, which will be going towards the House of Town Council's Open Space Action Plan, so that's a positive. I can't see anything negative about this development, and therefore I'm more than happy to move officers' recommendations for approval.
Thank you, Councillor Monday. Does it find a seconder? Councillor Ritchie does. Do you wish to speak, Councillor? Just
very briefly, thank you, Madam Chairman. You're happy to second this application. Just to labour a point slightly from Councillor Monday, I think what's good about this application is the variance in the type of units that are going to be there. I think you've got some opportunities to start off with some smaller businesses and also account for some larger businesses too that would make use of that type of development. So alongside the employment benefits that it will bring to Housestead, like I said, I think there's opportunity for some smaller ventures to either start up and then move on, or for some smaller ventures to move into some large premises, all in the same area as well. So happy to second, Madam Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Does anyone else? Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I agree about the use of the site. It's appropriate use. Just got a couple of questions. Do the conditions give us control to make sure, same question really as the previous application, that we will retain those boundary trees and features, because some of them look quite substantial, and if not, do we need to do something about that? I'm just thinking when developers get on sites, that's often not always the case that they retain what they're supposed to. And secondly, were those solar panels on the roofs that I saw?
In terms of the solar panels, these 3D photographs do appear to show that. We haven't included a condition to say that they should be built, in terms of installed. I'd have to refer to Neil as to whether that's a condition we've used in the past. Sorry, Neil, put you on the spot there.
Yeah, we can do. I mean, if members, the only way we can make sure they're delivered is if we put a condition on to say that we need to have details of the panels, that we approve the panel details, and that they're put in prior to use. Otherwise, if it's not covered by condition, it'd be down to the developer, and if the developer didn't want to put the panels on for some reason, then we couldn't force them to, or it would be very difficult to if we were just relying on the drawings here. So I think Councillor Abbot's point is if we want to make sure they're delivered, we should have a condition to cover that. So, yeah, and I couldn't see anything about the tree protection.
No, I just had a quick look. So we've got a condition about new landscaping, but we haven't got anything about specifically the trees next to the existing substation. So again, that could be a standard condition. That if you're happy,
yeah, if we could cover those two, that would be really good. I mean, it's just trying to improve the sustainability features, and to be positive to the developer. It's good to see we are. I mean, the previous one I meant to mention that there were solar panels there as well. I mean, it's an open goal, really, having solar PV on new industrial buildings, which often have substantial roof spaces to take them. And we've got very little ability to require them on new housing, which is ridiculous. We should do. But, if private developers of commercial developments are coming forward and putting them on themselves, that's to be, credit to them.
Actually, on page 61, Councillor, it does really say that, we do need to keep these trees for the ecological report, for the foraging, for the bats, etc., etc. Yes. So it is rather important that we do keep these trees. Yeah. So we need a condition on the solar panels, and also, have we got a lighting condition as well as well? No. Okay, that's fine. And a condition regarding maintaining the trees on the site that are there at the present time. I don't know how we word that one, but...
Yeah, I think what we need is we probably need details of how the trees are going to be protected. So I think Councillor Abbott's point is that although the applicant's saying they'll be retained, that we don't want them inadvertently being damaged during construction. So, yeah.
So we need a condition on details of how the trees will be
So that'd be a tree protection plan, I think, that we'll need, and we can ask our landscape services team to check that for us, so we can cover that.
And the solar panels.
Yep, got that.
As the mover of the
I'm
item,
happy,
are you
happy
happy
for
with
both
those
of those,
conditions,
yes.
Councillor Bonney? And as the second, Councillor Ritchie?
Also happy, thank you, Madam Chairman.
Right, thank you very much indeed. Councillor Mrs Spray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I'm very happy to support this. I know the site really well, having spent many years taking cars down there for MOTs and more repairs than I care to think about, really. But it's particularly good to see the site being put to an appropriate use. I think the designs are absolutely fine. They're quite functional, which is what you would expect for this type of business. It's already a nice, busy area down there, but very good to see some, additional employment use as well, hopefully. So happy to support it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Swear.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I agree with a lot of the comments that have been made previously, and I say I don't want to particularly go over them, but I would like to say to officers, well done on the heads of terms, because I'm very pleased to see the cycling donation strategy going in there. And I think that's a really important point, that we're beginning to start joining up the thinking about development, or not only benefiting jobs, but actually benefiting the residents and the people of Halstead, because as is said, the employment is great, but I think to have that cycling policy being incorporated into at this early stage is really good for the residents and the people of Halstead and any visitors.
Okay. Anyone else? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just an observation more than anything else. Sometimes these things are overlooked. Page 54, the fire service have made mention of the possibility of an additional water supply. Now, this is quite a dense industrial estate, and very often things happen. I just wonder, is there any reason for that to be discussed further? Or is it just a comment that's made from the fire service, or do we need to do any more? An additional hydrant might be quite useful.
Well, the applicant is urged to contact the water technical officer. Sorry,
we have been asked to consult the fire service now, which we didn't always do historically. We do get a pretty stock answer on these. I think, which is useful, I guess, for the applicants in terms of giving them a heads up, but ultimately it's covered by the building regulations. So, and we're continually told as planners that we shouldn't be duplicating things which are covered by other regulations. So I think we report it, obviously, because we're advised by the fire service, but we don't need to cover it by condition. It's covered by building regs. So hopefully that answers that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you very much. Yes, some of the comments from the piece are quite interesting too, aren't they? So, it has been moved by Councillor Munday, seconded by Councillor Ritchie, with the additional conditions regarding the solar panels and the tree protection. I'm putting that to the vote. All those in favour? That is also unanimous. Thank you, members. That now brings us to item 6, Tree Preservation Order 01A 2021, Garden Cottage Mill Lane, Pebmarsh. I do have a speaker on this application. Can I invite Mr. Braybrook to the table to make his statement? Thank you, Mr. Braybrook. I'll just remind you, you have 3 minutes. Thank
you. Madam Chairman and members of the committee, the 2 pine trees in question are not just a minor irritation, but are causing a real harm and distress to both my elderly parents and neighbouring properties. The trees tower over the bungalow and have already caused structural damage in the form of heath, which was rectified some 15 years ago. Unlike a standard deciduous tree, the pine needles do not rot down as leaves would, nor do they get blown away. Gutters are continuously getting blocked, and although we've attempted to use gutter guards, these have proved useless against the needles which stick in the brush-type protectors and penetrate the grill type. This is something that not only affects my parents, a house, but neighbouring properties on the opposite side of the lane. The roof is constantly covered by moss, and my parents regularly have to clean the roof which is not something I imagine anybody would consider normal maintenance. Pine cones, like this, fall from the trees onto parked cars, onto the driveway, and have caused dents. And personally, I no longer park my car on the driveway when I visit them and choose to park on the lane. However, it's a single-track lane, and this does cause inconvenience to other residents. I'm sure the question the members will be asking themselves is, surely the trees were there when the house was purchased? And yes, they were. However, as times have moved on, things have changed. The bungalow is heated via oil central heating, and there is no gas in the village. We have looked at various other methods of heating, but the trees mean that air source heat pumps would not work due to the needles blocking the fan. Ground source heating would almost certainly kill the trees, but assuming it didn't, the fan would also block. Electric heating is expensive and is normally subsidised by the installation of solar panels, but once again this option is not available to us. None of these technologies were available when the bungalow was purchased, but would go a long way to both reducing the heating costs and of course lowering their carbon footprint. The neighbouring property, Hunters, has had a similar issue in the past. However, in December of 2020, Braintree District Council granted permission for these 2 pine trees of the same size to be removed. The TPO suggests that our 2 trees form a group with these. They did, but they do not anymore. The TPO also suggests the trees have outstanding amenity value. Well, let's look at the amenity value. Twice within 8 months we have applied to have these trees removed. Both these applications were sent to the proactive Pedmarsh Parish Council for comment, and was on the agenda twice that anybody from Pedmarsh or the wider community could have commented on. It should be noted that on both occasions neither Pedmarsh Parish Council or the vast majority of residents in Pedmarsh and the wider community did not comment on the application. This certainly suggests to me that the amenity value is negligible and was demonstrated with the permission granted to remove the trees from the neighbouring property. I took the time to look at Braintree District Council's Pedmarsh Conservation Area Appraisal and Management Plan of September 2012, and 2.8 reads that throughout the conservation area, trees are in abundance, add to its quality, and a few of which have been made subject to a tree preservation order. These trees were not subject to tree preservation orders until after the neighbouring trees had been felled in January of 2021, and again suggests that at the time of the appraisal, when the trees were at full maturity, they were not considered important. I'm sure we all agree that trees play an important role in the environment, and I'm no exception. If the members agree to these trees being removed, I would be happy to liaise with either Pedmarsh Parish Council or Braintree District Council on funding more trees in a suitable location in order to mitigate any loss of wildlife habitat or environmental impact. So to summarise, these trees are damaging both property and vehicles. Braintree District Council has already given permission to the neighbouring property to remove their trees. The trees prevent any investment in low-cost, low-carbon technologies. Amenity value is low, as demonstrated by the 2 consultations carried out with residents and the Parish Council, and the removal already of neighbouring trees, and we can mitigate any loss of habitat and wildlife to the environment or environmental impact by funding more trees. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Mr. Braybrooke. I'll now go to the presentation, which is going to be made by Sean. Good evening, Sean.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, members. Oh, yes. Right. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. This report asks you to consider confirming Provisional Order 1A/2021 for 2 pine trees at Garden Cottage, Mill Lane, Pedmarsh, in light of the objections, some of which you've heard just in the last few minutes. The trees are growing within the property at Garden Cottage, which sits within broadly within the centre of the conservation area, and the trees are on the east side of the boundary of the cottage with road frontage. Scots pine and the black pine, both mature trees, and a significant presence within the street scene. Both trees are visible from Mill Lane and from the surrounding residential properties. They're also visible from the main thoroughfare through the village and from the entrance to St John's Church at the end of the street, a bit more visible in that slide. The trees are located to the east of the property with the shadow they cast falling away by late morning. The canopies of both trees have been lifted in past years to provide clearance over the adjacent power lines. The original application contained various reasons in support of felling the trees. A number of these, as you've heard, focused on nuisance and damage resulting from the natural processes of trees. Issues caused by natural processes relating to tree growth are not recognised as a legal nuisance and are not felt sufficient to justify felling these trees. The council has a policy leaflet that we give out for management of trees on our own land because, as we're all aware, trees drop leaves and needles and debris throughout the year, and that's just part of the cyclical pattern of tree growth. It's a feature we live with, along with the benefits they provide us, with which we all are aware. Both trees are at substantial height, but some distance from the roof of the bungalow. The applicant also raised concerns about poor television reception. The trees have been a significant feature for many years, and in all such cases where there are issues or concerns about television reception, we do ask them to demonstrate that all engineering solutions have been explored before tree pruning or removal can be considered. A confirmation of a tree preservation order wouldn't prevent the applicant from applying to do works to the trees, and certainly looking at the black pine, which is the tree nearest to us in that picture, the canopy could be lifted slightly without detriment to the health of the tree or reducing its impact on the street scene. The application also stated that the trees were too high for a residential area, but there's no limit to the height that trees can get to in terms of law, and there are plenty of other locations that I can think of where there are significant sized trees within residential areas. And I think as long as we're confident that the trees are in a healthy condition, there's no reason why that should be an issue in its own right. Just maybe touch on, there was an application last year to remove 2 trees from the adjacent property, and I think the point needs to be made that we received the application, and under the legislation, if we object to the removal of trees, we have to serve a tree preservation order within 6 weeks of the application being validated. And I'm afraid we didn't have enough time when that application came in because of some staff shortages and the COVID situation we were under, and we ran out of time. So before we could serve a tree preservation order object to that particular application, the owner of the property felled the trees, which he was right to do so because we hadn't served the order. So we didn't approve the removal of the trees, it's just we hadn't served the order. And unfortunately, under the conservation area legislation, the only thing we can do, we can't refuse an application, we have to make a tree preservation order. So we actually have to physically make an order. It's not like a planning application where we can say the application is refused. We actually have to physically make a legal order, and I'm afraid that does take time sometimes. And the pressures we're under at the time, I'm afraid this one slipped under the net. So it wasn't that we approved the application to remove the neighbouring trees. Just in conclusion, both pines are prominent trees within the local vicinity, provide good amenity value. Appendix A to this report does provide a number of statements from letters from other residents who object to the felling of the trees, and those are there for you to consider. I think in closing, the trees are an attractive feature within the conservation area. They do enhance the character and provide amenity and seasonal interest. And on that basis, I would ask that the tree preservation order is confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean. Thank you. Councillor Mrs Spray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Notwithstanding, I think, the circumstances of the tree removal at the next door property, which I'll come on to in a minute, every planning application has to be determined on its own merits and considered separately. And I know that the issue of the tree removal at the adjacent property, Hunters, has figured quite strongly in the applicant's request to have their trees felled. But we do have to look at this one individually. The Essex County Council senior arboriculturalist consultant was very clear, is very clear, that there are no reasons for removing the trees on the grounds that, you know, they are not healthy or that they are unsafe. And she has been extremely clear on that point. I do know the site very well. They are two very prominent trees and they do form an important part of the landscape. You know, trees are and can be messy and inconvenient, and, you know, I think we realise that, but that's not a reason, those aren't reasons for removing them. And I do think it would have a really strong impact on the landscape if these were to come down. I think it's important to just reiterate something that Sean said, and which is set out page 74 of the agenda, point 3.12, about the next door trees. BDC didn't give permission for them to come down, and it's really unfortunate that they were felled. When the application came in, the Place Services consultant at County actually recommended refusal for them to be felled. But unfortunately, as Sean has explained, and it is set out clearly in the report, before the TPOs could be put on the trees, the owner took them down, which was his right to do because they didn't have protection orders on them. I think it's a real shame. I think there is no doubt that had circumstances allowed, we would have put TPOs on them and they would still be there. So I appreciate Mr Braybrook's representations on behalf of his parents who own the property and the inconvenience that the trees are causing them. But as I say, those are not reasons for us to agree to the removal of two quite prominent and healthy trees. So on that basis, Chairman, I will support the retention of the TPOs on both trees. Thank you.
You're saying you're moving it, or you're...
Yes, sorry, Chairman, I'm moving it.
Okay, thank you. Does it find a second? It does. Councillor Mrs Parker, do you wish to speak?
Yes, please, Madam Chairman. I think the picture above shows very, very well the importance, the contribution of these trees make to the conservation area. And I think the conservation areas is not just about the buildings, but is about the natural vegetation and everything really that exists within the conservation area. I actually think that because the two neighbouring trees have unfortunately been removed, it is all the more important that these trees are retained. I fully support the officer's recommendation. I do understand the concerns that the speaker has mentioned in relation to his parents, but as has been highlighted by Sean, the arguments around nuisance are not adequate reasons to resist a TPO. So I'm happy to second the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Parker. Anyone? Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I was just wondering, there's quite a few photographs in the written report. Is it possible to see them? Are they part of the presentation?
I'm afraid I've only put three photos in the report. So there's a second.
Otherwise we've got to do.
Yeah. So this is one just roughly from the church looking down Mill Street towards the south. So the black pine is the stronger of the trees towards the rear. Scots pine is almost invisible because it's a smaller tree in front. And then you've got two large trees further up towards the road junction there where the white van is. Sorry, I'm not sure what's over here. So that gives a clearer picture of the trees sitting within the garden ground at the front of the bungalow, and proximity to the road, and maybe the distance to the bungalow itself. But I think you can see from there that they're quite clear stems to quite a height. So I think it really speaks for itself, really.
Is it? Anyone else wish to? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have to say, when considering purchasing any property, prospective purchasers should identify any existing trees, as trees obviously mature, depending upon the species, slowly or quickly. These particular trees, I think, do enhance the area. And as a tree warden of some 20 odd years, I have discussed with many owners such requests, including from one owner who owns several mature beech trees and required them all to be felled because they were dropping beech nuts. That's one of those unfortunate things. Trees do drop leaves, they do drop acorns, etc., etc. Most people would recognise that, so I certainly would support the retention of this order. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Swear.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I just ask the officer that my understanding is correct, that should this TPO go ahead, that the applicant or the owners can come back at any time for crown lifting or reduction at any point to limit any potential damage? Thank you.
I'll ask Sean to confirm it, but yes, you can.
Yeah, so as with any other tree preservation order, the applicant is free to apply to do works to the trees, and that would be considered on its merits at the time. So, I mean, I think with a pine tree, I'd rather see the canopy lifted. Pines don't respond to being topped because the apical growth at the top is the key thing for a pine tree. So, but lifting the canopy from below is certainly something that happens a lot, and maybe some, I know, depending on the extent of the application. But yes, there's nothing to stop the household or agent making an application on that respect, and that would be considered on its merits.
Thank you for that, Sean. On members, it has been moved and seconded. It's been moved by Councillor Mrs. Spray, seconded by Councillor Mrs. Parker, that the tree preservation order number 01A 2021 at Garden Cottage, Mill Lane, Pedmarsh, be confirmed. All those in favour? Thank you, members. That is unanimous. Thank you. Well, that brings us to the end of our planning agenda for this evening. Well, thank you very much. And don't get too cold on the way home.